Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an incredibly dense, honestly paradigm-shifting essay by Benoit Nounier-Lapierre called Algorithmic Hegemon. Now, this isn't your standard international relations brief. No, this is a hyper-complex, post-structural look at the very fabric of our modern world. If you want to understand what's actually happening behind the geopolitical curtain, well, you're absolutely in the right place. My promise to you today is that we're going to cut right through all the academic jargon, decode this theory, and uncover the hidden reality behind global geopolitics. So who really runs the world? I mean, we're constantly fed this narrative that the defining struggle of our century is this fierce, head-to-head rivalry between the United States and China, right? It completely dominates the news cycle. But is this rivalry exactly what it seems? Or, as Nounier-Lapierre suggests, is it just a massive distraction from where true power has actually migrated? The author actually shatters this whole assumption with a really punchy observation. The country is actively unmemorized. Think about that. We still think of traditional nation-states, countries with hard borders, flags, parliaments, as the main characters in world events. But this essay argues that the concept of the nation-state, it's becoming vestigial. It's actively being erased, hollowed out, and basically replaced by something far more complex and distributive. Okay, let's dive right into this. To decode this theory together, we'll start with the illusion of nations, then the rise of technofeudalism, followed by the digital debt bubble. After that, we'll ask what is pluripotent AI, look at the inevitable AI monoculture, and finally wrap up with our algorithmic future. All right, part 1, the illusion of nations. Let's look at the collapse of sovereignty. We really need to explore how the traditional scaffolding of international law and sovereign borders has essentially just collapsed into a jurisdictional vacuum. Let's contrast the old world with our new reality. Old geopolitics? That was defined by maritime stability, UN treaties, and naval power. Basically, if you control the sea lanes, you control the world. But today, that whole system is completely obsolete. We're in an era of new proxy warfare. Conflict is now fought through algorithmically optimized supply chains, cyber-physical sabotage, and cognitive proxy wars. Navies are, well, they're really just legacy hardware in an era where power is projected through data centers and semiconductor choke points. Moving on to part 2. Rise of technofeudalism and the emergence of digital lords. So if the traditional nation-state is hollowing out, what on earth is stepping in to replace it? The author introduces a pretty radical concept here, technofeudalism. And it's not just a metaphor. It's a completely new socio-economic order. Massive tech transcorporations, think of your giant frontier AI labs and cloud providers, they function as modern-day digital lords. They own the computational infrastructure and the data flows. And in the system, everyday citizens are literally reduced to data serfs. Our behavioral patterns, our economic activities, they're just harvested as training data. It's the big tech entities, not elected governments, that are now the primary sites of political agency. And that realization leads us right into what the author calls the theatricality of political agency. Basically, politicians perform power, algorithms execute it. When you see a high-level diplomatic summit or a flashy congressional hearing or some new piece of legislation being signed, the essay argues that this is mostly performative governance. It's a theatrical stage set up to maintain the illusion of national volition, all while masking the reality that true governance has already been absorbed by transcorporate algorithms, which are just optimized for capital accumulation. Which brings us to part 3, the digital debt bubble. Let's look at the economic substrate underneath all this. Let's move to the economic reality that actually underwrites this entire new feudal order. This is the cycle of digital illusion. First, value completely detaches from material reality. Then, currencies digitize. Think of central bank digital currencies or crypto, which the author argues actually just masks underlying economic constraints and creates a total surveillance bottleneck. And step 3, speculative algorithms extract wealth from this system. So we aren't looking at true economic democratization at all, we're looking at a bottlenecked, debt-oriented speculative bubble. To put the fragility of this bubble into perspective, just look at this number, 130%. The U.S. sovereign debt trajectory actually exceeds 130% of its GDP. The financialized system is literally rusting on a knife's edge right now. According to the essay, this global economic structure desperately needs massive AI productivity windfalls just to survive. Without an absolute economic miracle generated by artificial intelligence, this debt bubble risks a catastrophic, algorithmic collapse. But here's the crazy paradox. Despite all this digital illusion, the material hardware bottleneck is very, very real. You see, you cannot run an AI model without physical GPUs,
And you can't build those GPUs without rare earth minerals. China exerts an incredible asymmetric deterrence here, controlling roughly 69% of global rare earth processing. So, the financial power of the West is directly bottlenecked by the industrial material power of the East.
Okay, part 4. What is pluripotent AI? Let's step into this new territory. We're shifting now from the economic substrate to the real technological tipping point of this whole theory. The author uses a really great biological metaphor here. Think of a stem cell, right? One that can adapt and differentiate into literally any tissue in the human body. Well, pluripotent AI refers to generalized foundational models that act exactly like that. They aren't just narrow tools. They can fine-tune themselves to manage military targeting, optimize economic supply chains, synthesize financial derivatives, or even engineer cultural narratives. It's essentially the new operating system of civilization. It is not just a tool. It is the new territory. The essay insists that the US-China relationship is no longer a traditional rivalry over physical geography. Not anymore. It is fundamentally an existential struggle over the parameters, the ethics, and the control mechanisms of this very specific, pluripotent cognitive architecture. This brings us to part 5, the inevitable AI monoculture and converging algorithms. And here is the big twist of this entire explainer, the inevitable AI monoculture. First, let's look neutrally at the ideological differences outlined in the text. You have the American model, driven by private venture capital, the Silicon Valley ecosystem, and a decentralized market-first approach. Conversely, the Chinese model is state-guided, fueled by massive government big funds, and relies heavily on centralized alignment and social integration. So on the surface, they appear to be complete opposites, right? Well, now, what's really interesting about this is that despite all the political decoupling theater, 3 mechanisms actually force both superpowers to build an identical, shared AI monoculture. First up, computational homogenization. They're bound by the exact same shared hardware and data center constraints. Second, security framing. Both sides justify massive centralized control under the guise of safety and stability. And third, functional polyvalence. Because pluripotent AI is just so adaptable, they both end up using the exact same transformer-derived architectures for everything. So rather than diverging, they're actually converging into one identical algorithmic reality. Finally, part 6, our algorithmic future. Let's look at the metathesis of values. We really need to synthesize what this immense monoculture means for our future as a society. The author breaks this down through a philosophical concept called the metathesis, which is essentially a tragic inversion of our core values. Historically, the ideal of justice was supposed to serve love, meaning it existed to protect human flourishing, human dignity, and relationality. But now, the flip has occurred. Justice is algorithmically optimized to protect and serve the wealth capital agenda. Morality has been completely subordinated to the efficiency of the transcorporate AI machine. So where exactly does this leave us in the near future? Well, the essay speculates on 3 geopolitical outcomes for 2030 to 2035. Scenario 1 is bipolar fragmentation, a managed, though highly inefficient, parallel rivalry. Scenario 2 is convergent monoculture, where the shared vulnerabilities of this identical AI architecture lead to massive systemic shocks and a very brittle, fragile uniformity. Or Scenario 3, asymmetric pluripotent dominance, where one actor achieves a decisive lead, imposes their standards globally, and just absorbs all global agency, basically forcing every other middle power into complete algorithmic alignment. And this brilliantly illustrates the core reality of the text. As the author states, the defining geopolitical question is who shapes the operating system through which humanity collectively thinks. I mean, sovereignty has completely migrated. It's no longer defined by physical borders or naval fleets or old international treaties. It is defined entirely by intelligence architectures. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to wrap up our explainer. In a world governed by an AI monoculture, a world of technofeudalism and theatrical politics, what happens to human agency, justice, and love? Are we destined to be mere data serfs in a hyperdense algorithmic future? Or can we actually find a way to reclaim our sovereignty? I highly encourage you to think about your own place within this rapidly changing system. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning the operating system.